Let's move on to the next session, which is Finding Data Sources to Harness for Evidence Backed Reporting. Despite being in an era of information overload, finding reliable and credible data is still a challenge for journalists and communicators. This session delves into strategies for sourcing, verifying, and using data to tell compelling, evidence backed science stories. I'd like to welcome on stage Anuradha Mascarenas, who is a journalist with the Indian Express, Chetan Kumar, Senior Assistant Editor with the Times of India, Surbhi Bhatia, a data journalist and trainer, and the session will be moderated by Aditi Tandon, Senior Production Editor, Monga Bay, India.
As today's session is on data, finding reliable data for science stories, evidence-based stories. And so I'd just like to start with maybe Anuradha and then come down the row about just what's your personal process of using data in stories? So you have a story, you have data. What's your personal process of using data? So Anuradha works a lot on health and gender, and you can talk about a little bit about your beats as well.
So first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, and it's great to be here, and it's such a lively audience. So yeah, I've been here around for a while, and I do not have any structured kind of training in data journalism. That's for sure. I've learned over the job, and but what I realized, even like say 10, 15 years ago when I was writing on health, so there was this very small study on diabetes, and it's like a silent epidemic that's creeping on you. And, we didn't know what to make of those figures. I spoke to the editor then, and the best thing was to speak to so many experts who are reliable, trustworthy, and who have expert opinions. Not only that, but their research has been published in very, very established peer-reviewed journals. So, we did that story, the silent epidemic in Pune, diabetes, among the slowly creeping onto you. I'm not sure if you'll remember, but this was some time back. And that was really very well read and a lot of, response. So one thing I have learned is that yes, you need reliable sources, and for me, especially if I have been on the mailing list of a lot of important kind of news journals, like for instance the Lancet and stuff like that. So I definitely, if something is there, I flag the edit. I mean, I just tell the editors, and we try to understand what questions have to be answered.
Yeah.
Because there's so much of data, it can be boring.
Yeah.
I mean, there's tons. There's like, there's so much of record that you just go on, and like you get confused. Like, what do? You take the male numbers, you take the female numbers, you take. So, then finally I discuss with the editor. The editor also guides us as to, how you should kind of present it. And of course, like we are told, we have a phone book. So we contact the best of the people who are there in the field. Mm-hmm. Also, you look at stories, perhaps if they've been written about earlier. So then, you tend to kind of, support, you have supportive evidence as well. And of course, you go onto websites and you try to kind of figure out, okay, if this is fine and, they're reliable, trustworthy, accurate. Yeah. That is basically the hallmark of journalism.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, that's good. So reliable data, accessing a lot of experts, good experts. And Chetan, what about you? Chetan works on space primarily. So what's your personal process?
Personal process, I'm an analog guy stuck in a digital world. I do everything with pen and paper, the arithmetic, the percentage calculations, and all of it happens on pen and paper. It's for dual purpose really. One is that as a journalist, you encounter so many new subjects every week. So when you're looking at data, it's often quite useless if you don't understand what are the kind of questions you want to answer, if you don't know the W's and the H's. So a lot of it boils down to the basics of journalism. So what are you trying to say? So I usually try to use data as an accompanying thing with a story that I'm trying to narrate. So that way data embellishes your copy, and then it also makes it more reliable for the reader, because when you see numbers, and if they are reliable numbers truly, because I also believe that in many places, and especially it's true to our country, I don't know if I can always say that I have authentic data on something, but I know I can say I have official data on something. There is a distinction there, and media organizations, no matter how big, sometimes or in most cases don't have the logistical wherewithal to go back and check if something is authentic. Like, did 4 people really die of COVID yesterday or 17 died? It's sometimes difficult for you to go back and cross check. So sometimes you take official data at face value. It comes with its own risks, and you may have to go back and debunk that maybe a few months later or a few weeks later once you have more to go with. So that is one process. So because you deal with so many different topics, I like the pen and paper thing because it then gets registered in my head, so I know what are the numbers and where you insert them in your copy, or if you use them as a accompanying graphic, or you weave it into the copy, because different stories need different treatment. And as great as visual appeal is in a newspaper, I think if you can't read it, it's kind of useless. So I still believe that the most basic kind of graphics are the best. The table, the bar graph, and the pie chart are by far the best tools to be used in while presenting it. You can try and do a lot of other things, which we do on a daily basis. We try to do it. We are brainstorming about it. We're trying to do a full page of graphic with as little text as possible, because apparently people don't like reading. And so there are a lot of those challenges that come up, when you're trying to present data, as to how do you present it, what is the right kind of graphic. And it's a teamwork, right? Because you don't write, you don't also do the graphic. So if a graphic artist is not somebody who's attuned to news or who's kept herself or himself up to date, there's always a risk of them ending up using the long graph to show the wrong thing. Like, to cite an example, I was reading some paper during COVID, and somebody had district-wise data of death. They had done a nice big half page and a line graph. Like, the death in Bangalore somehow is connected to death in Pune. And it's all going like this. So now when you look at the paper, it looks very nice. But then it's just not the right graph to use. So there are those challenges also, because there are no experts per se. So data is a challenging thing, how you use it. So a lot of official data is relied upon. And some of the survey-based things I'm very apprehensive about using, because the sample size usually is very small, and then the study headline would be India has denounced word of mouth marketing. And some 3 people they would have spoken to, or 3,000 at best.
And I'm going to add to
I think
what
Anuradha
Chetan
wants to
says about the district data, especially in COVID. So this was like a huge challenge, because the district data was different from what the state data was giving us, and the death numbers were way too high in district, but in the state it was less.
Yeah.
So they were huge challenges.
Great. And Surbhi, what's your personal process? Surbhi's data journalist, has been a data trainer as well, training journalist on using data for stories. So when you do data journalism, what's your process?
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Aditi, and thank you everyone whose work has gone behind this conference for having us here and for having this conversation. Very important. So Chetan said, another person's doing graphics, another person's doing writing. Unfortunately, in my case, when I was a data journalist, budding years, we were doing it all. One person was doing it all. I would do the graphics, I would do the writing, I would do this question, So in those years, I actually was so overwhelmed. And now I see newsrooms are more, they have divided this. There is division of labor. There is a person who's doing there's a developer who's only doing data viz, and there is a journalist who's only doing the copy. But back when I was at Mint, we were just doing everything. We were a 5-people team running a weekly, a daily page, which means 5 stories a week. It was pretty intense. And back in the day, I used to think if there is no data, there is no story, which was so naive of me, because now having put all these years in doing the same thing over and over again and covering different beats. So I've had stories in public finance, health, education, Bollywood, everything, you name it, and I found data to do it, because that's what I do. I'm a bit of a generalist in that sense. So I used to think if there's no data, there is no story, which was pretty naive. Now I think that has flipped significantly for me. I approach it with a question first. If I have a hypothesis, I'm not gonna go find the truth. I'm just finding if my intuition about what I think is true or not. if that makes sense. So I'm just testing my intuition and I'm trying to then find data for it. So that whole process has flipped. And if I may be a little theoretical here, we do it subconsciously, but Paul Bradshaw at the Birmingham University has actually, if you just Google it, you will find this inverted pyramid of data journalism. He's actually written down the process for all of us, but that is what we do subconsciously. So I really start with cleaning the data. Once I have my question, I find the data, compile the data, and then I spend a lot of time cleaning it. When I clean the data, I use a mix of Excel, sometimes back of the envelope calculations. Okay, should I take a mean? Should I take a median? I am also a programmer, but I didn't go to either journalism school or coding school. I've just learned on the job. So I spend significant amount of time cleaning the data, because if it's not clean, you're just not going to get any insights out of it. And we use a bunch of tools for that. We can come to that later. And then you just pivot from that. Once you've got your clean data, think of it as a prism now dispersing light, right? Now you've got to communicate that story. So you now then make a narrative. Then you make, you have visuals. And then one thing that I've learned after becoming a trainer is you've got to simplify. You cannot say 90% of farmers. Sometimes people don't, it's dry statistics, people are in denial of it. They don't relate to it. If you say 9 in 10 farmers, they're like, yeah, I understand that, right? If I say so much water is being consumed by coffee because, so many farms are using so much water, they don't want to know aggregate statistics. If I say your black coffee consumes so much water, they will listen. So I really work on simplification, simplifying my findings, and in a way, even humanizing the data, because the numbers that you're finding, there are faces behind those numbers. When we were in the pandemic, we found death rates, we found, there were families and numbers behind, faces behind those numbers, which were actually, they went through the brunt of what the pandemic left them with, right? People were dying and we were seeing these line charts going up, but you really have to zoom in and say, okay, how does it affect the unit at hand, which is a family, a person, a human being. So I humanize the data while I visualize the data as well. So that's the pyramid way of working. That's how I work. That's my process.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. And a couple of things I heard, which we'll come back to in a bit, about, tools, about intuition. But I wanted to talk about reliability of data. All of you mentioned that you use reliable data. How do you make sure data is reliable? And have there been instances where you've rejected data because you've found that it's unreliable in some way, and what has that been like? So Anuradha, you can start about reliable data. How do you know it's reliable?
See, I'm going to talk about the COVID pandemic, because that really showed how science is also should be reported, and there's been tons of information out there, and how you actually interpret that information to bring it to the reader. So if I remember correctly, and my colleague Amitabh is here in the audience, and he used to lead the COVID, we used to have these, and he was in Pune at that time. So there were these multiple preprint papers. Oh my God, it was crazy. But the best thing was that these preprint papers, they did offer some kind of narrative over there, because see, this is a virus which was growing. We don't know much. So how do you then decipher the data coming out from this preprint papers? So fortunately, there were people in NIV here, there were people in ISA, there were people in NCL, and I'm coming back again to ask the expert. Because even that reliability, even if it is the smallest of small study with the smallest sample, how reliable is it? You need some I'm not a science person, right? So I'm a journalist. So even if I were a science person and I could be swayed by what the science is saying, I am a journalist first. Yeah. So I need to understand that effectively from a reliable and a trustworthy source. And trustworthy sources also can have an agenda. But that also can give you another story. So there's a story within a story. So So that's how you go. And then, of course, there are websites like WHO, the United Nations, the World Bank. You can go back to these trusted sources. So you do go back. And, there's always like a fact check. So there are multiple checks also in our office. So like even if I'm a primary reporter, there are other people who are also looking and navigating through this kind of thing. So it's like a team effort, like how Chetan said.
Yeah. Chetan, what do you think about reliability of data?
No, see, given the nature of uh, journalism and the kind of deadlines you operate with and all that, a lot of times it's smarter to rely on data that is official. I keep going back to this because then the onus or the burden of proof is not on you. Because when a responsible person is trying to say something, or a person who's been put in an office of certain responsibility is putting out certain data, you can run the risk of initially taking it at face value. When you're really out of time and you have to communicate something, and especially in cases where you have emerging crises like the pandemic was one time where I broke the rule of publishing preprint journal copies, because I have not done it before that. I don't do it now after that. At that time, we used to write it with a disclaimer saying this is a preprint and it hasn't been peer reviewed as yet, because the idea was to give those findings and make them public so that somebody else could pick up on it and maybe debunk it or agree with it or find similar solutions in their lab. It sort of, what the idea was to expedite finding solutions. So that time the rule was broken. But otherwise the idea is to see, there are two kinds of data stories. One that Aditi was talking about, where you have a question and you look for data. The other one is there is data and you write a story.
Yeah.
So if you look at data journalism in most traditional organizations, it's usually the latter. In most cases, it is the budget is out, then there's a story, the RBI review is out, there's a story, the census is completed, there's a data story. So it's usually stories that are done based on data, and seldom do you find instances where you're trying to look for data to make an argument. So when that happens is when this question of reliability, which data source do you go to, all of that becomes critical. And usually in those kind of cases, you have ample time to work because you're not in a hurry to write that story. You know this question needs to be addressed and this needs to become a discussion piece that everybody talks about. And that time you have the time. So you try and look at multiple sources for similar kind of data. Like if you're doing a story on health, for instance, if you get a national level data, the sample size is different. Now, when you look at what kind of, out-of-pocket spending that somebody might do, for instance, the national level data will give you a different kind of data set. If a particular state is conducting a similar exercise, where the state might have had the opportunity to meet more people in a particular state, then there is a difference. Then there is a difference in how people spend in Bangalore vis-a-vis Haryana, so let's say in Gurgaon or in the hinterlands. There is a way what kind of money is spent in Bombay. So there are multiple variables that you have to account for before you sort of weave all of them together and put out a narrative. So it is challenging, but when you are looking to answer something, you are in a better placed position. But data is scarce, and uniformity of data is a huge challenge. Like even if different states do the same kind of studies, the methods they use are not same. So they're not comparable, directly. Then you have to again use disclaimers, try to elaborate on that. So that becomes a challenging
I was going to
process.
ask that. Like, do you add disclaimers that okay, the methodology across states is different? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I do
But
just
that serves no purpose to the actual reader, because
They want the
they're like,
story and the
is this
answer.
right or is this not right?
Yeah.
So you trying to be all scientific there sometimes doesn't drive the point home, but then it's a question of ethical.
But I just want to add one point, especially because of a recent study that I did, and it was a learning experience for me as well. There was this study on diabetes, okay? And see, we can't just take Lancet data because, yes, of course, it is very important. But the kind of parameters that they used to talk about diabetes in the country was really alarming. So when you check for diabetes, you either do the fasting blood glucose and the HbA1c. So the India diabetes study is there, but the HbA1c, what we take the 3-month HbA1c, the values, that was used by the Lancet researchers to give such crazy numbers that even I was shocked. I said, oh my God, so many diabetics in the country. And the India B study did not have that kind of number. So that kind of gave a red flag. I'm like, okay, what is going on here? And then that's the reason why I'm saying that. Then I got back to Dr. Mohan and the diabetes centers, and they said that, look, HbA1c, there are a lot of factors that can affect HbA1c, so which can affect diabetes. So don't use that. So that's what I meant
That-
when,
talking
you
to
need to
experts
talk
and
to more
verifying
credible
that
sources.
data. Yeah. And Surabhi, reliability of data, and also like if you could talk a little bit about any tools you use or you recommend to journalists when working with data.
Okay, so I'm just going to go out and say that reliable sources of data may not have reliable data. They are two different things, which you were saying, official versus authentic. And one of the bigger examples of this is that when you look at administrative data, which the government puts out, which is official and you should rely on it, they can go out and say on their dashboard that India is 99% open defecation free. But when you then compare it with the household survey, when you look at NFHS, look at NSSO, it's a completely different story. So in our country, I feel administrative data, survey data, and national accounts data, they just don't speak to each other. They are all doing their own thing. So that's one thing. And for me, I work with both structured data and unstructured data. So sometimes if I'm not able to find the data, I scrape it and I'll make a data set for myself and all of that. But for me, it's very important so if it's a survey, what's the methodology, who is included, who is excluded, is it private, is it government backed, whose funds are in it. If post COVID you are getting surveys which are showing that drinking something can cure you, some baba is funding it, right? So you need to know this. So who's funding it, who's excluded from the sample. There was this whole debate about employment surveys, and CMI would do its own sample, and your NSSO will do a different sample, and now you have different estimates, and we really don't know what to rely on. So sometimes you have to report it as it is, and that itself is a story. So yeah, that's about reliability of data. Coming to tools, I use a host of tools, and now I think it's becoming easier and easier for anybody to be able to use those tools, because back in the day it was like, okay, Excel, pie charts, bar charts. Then I started programming because I was feeling very limited with, I wanted to make cool charts, but I also want to put a disclaimer there. There is a big difference between a data-driven story and a data-decorated story. So you really need to know when you're consuming something, which one are you consuming, right? Something looks very nice, but really there is no investigation there, which is also fine, right? We're living in the age of content, so it's fine. So I started working on R a lot. Then I moved to Python. I use QGIS. So this is a spectrum of tools which is open source. But the cool thing is, I feel like I'm already being displaced from that ecosystem, because Flourish has come in and Data Wrapper has come in. So I don't have to use packages which will give me interactive charts. And in any case, newsrooms don't have the interface to host some of those. So, but if it's an iframe, they can easily embed it in an HTML. So, so you work on what do you call it, Data Wrapper and Flourish. In fact, I've started using a lot more, because it can almost give you dashboard kind of interactivity. You can make buttons and you can be like, okay, I want to see it for another state. Now can this pie chart change for another state? So, it's pretty cool, and the reader is also interacting with your data set and your findings. So those are some tools I use. There are some other things that I do subliminally, which can translate into tools, cannot translate, which is, you look at what is your story about? Is it about scale? Is it about change? Is it about rank and outliers? Is it about variation? So, these are some rule of thumb things that I keep in mind when I'm doing a story, that what is it, what new knowledge are we creating above and beyond what is reported on this matter? So that's that.
Yeah. So I want to go to Chetan, the analog person in a digital world, because we're talking about so many tools. Beyond tools, like, do you use your intuition, which came up a few times? Do you use your intuition how do you use your intuition to, gauge data, whether it's authentic, not? Sometimes, like you said, official data, you report it. But sometimes it's gut feeling, or is it?
So I'll go back to two things. One during elections and one COVID. I'll give you two examples so that you understand. So during COVID, deaths were being reported every day, and so were visuals being shown, across ambulances queuing up outside crematoria and all of that. So this Bangalore death reporting, there used to be a bulletin. This Karnataka state had a bulletin, which I think most states did follow a similar kind of a thing. We would get a COVID bulletin every evening with the last 24 hours kind of deaths recorded, and how many in the ICUs, how many active cases, how many discharged, and all of that thing. So one case, there was, I think, some clerical error or something. That's what I thought first. There were serial numbers were not matching. But then the daily deaths, I was looking at it, and you kept looking at the visuals that television channels are showing, and my own colleague was out in the field, doing these human interest stories from crematoria and all that. So then I decided that maybe you should check the death numbers because there's something amiss. So then it took me almost a week to sort of go back and do this. I first started talking to the crematoria staff. There were 12 dedicated crematoria where COVID protocol burials were, or final rites were happening. So I started talking to some of them, and off the cuff they were giving me numbers that it's these many at my crematorium, it's these many at mine, and the numbers were not adding up. Then I went back and tried to see if we could get registry of those crematoria to see how many deaths they're recording, because all COVID deaths had a certain protocol and there was a registry being maintained. Then we found that Karnataka was reporting for every 2 deaths, it was reporting 1. So which is like you're hiding half the deaths. So that later got, the government then responded saying, no, some of those crematoria may be getting bodies from other districts, which was not the case. And then eventually all of it came a full circle, and then we found out through compensation numbers eventually, when compensation was being handed out, that the crematoria numbers and the compensation were more close to each other than the official bulletin and the thing. So that was one thing. And the second one was when during elections, the electoral rolls came out.
Yeah.
I saw the Bangalore one, 97 lakh. So if you look at the EPR and you do the math backwards, either Bangalore has 1.8 crore people or the rolls are inflated.
Yeah.
It has to be one of the two. There's no way of proving it correctly, but we presented that story saying it's either this or that. Then the civic administration said, see, our estimation is that the Bangalore population is about 1.4, which means then this cannot be, because if this is your thing, then your EPR is about 83 or 84, which is highly unusual for any place, because ideally it's typically 6 out of 10 are eligible to vote. That is the thing that most people go with. But if you look at electoral data rolls in most states this season, they've all been showing EPRs of 80, 90, and nobody's questioning it because there's something amiss. I know we have a young population and all that, but 60 could become 65 or 70, but 85 and all that is a little bit too much.
Yeah.
So then we went back and they said, yeah, our rolls are inflated. So which is why Bangalore keeps reporting a low turnout. No matter how many people go and vote, it's not crossing 50%.
Because of that, yeah. And so Anuradha, I'd like to go to you and ask you, I mean, you've been in this field for 25 years, reporting now. Yeah, no, we're all there, it's okay. So in this time, I mean, you've worked with data, you've done field stories, you've spoken to experts, all of it. What happens when sometimes, say, anecdotal data or traditional wisdom or people from the field report in your interviews, they tell you something and that doesn't match official data or the data that you're working with? How do you communicate that in your stories?
Since we were talking about elections, and there are a lot of these ideological think tanks, and they have their reports. So actually, what really is written over there may not really be correct. So let's just take, for example, the number of, I won't talk about the Ladki Behan, but let's say female sterilizations or, something numbers which they said we have done so much, we have done so much, but probably being around for a while, I realized, no, there's something amiss here. So then, you go back to the state government guys, you try to find out, you get the breakup, you kind of cross-check. So, that is the thing that usually we tend to do.
In your stories, do you sometimes say that, okay, this is what the official data says, but this is anecdotal data, which kind of is different? And
So
Chetan, you can add to that if...
No, for instance, even if we take examples, I'd rather speak for examples, say, women engaged in rolling all these BDs, the BD workers. Okay, so there's tons of data. But there are tons of studies as well. But then you can get an anecdotal, you can go out in the field, you can go to one village somewhere nearby, see the story, pair the data with those kind of stories, and then bring it forth. So that's what we have also been kind of told to do this. It's better
Better
reading.
to do that. And do either
But
of you want to
essentially,
add
the
to
data
that?
may
Yeah.
not really match. Huh? I mean, you have to be very careful. For instance, if Mysore has this entire thing or Pune has, so you have to be very careful. If there is a new study which talks about this problem and then kind of revolve your story around that, then I think also makes sense.
Yeah, I think putting out those, I mean, like Chetan also mentioned, those disclaimers and what may change later, like all of this is part of the process of building trust with your
And like
audience, right?
she said also, the methodology is very
Methodology,
important. How did they do it?
Yeah.
What was the funding source? They
Yeah.
have to disclose the funding source.
You can go ahead,
I just
Surbhi,
have
and then you can.
so me and a couple of my friends, we just call it anecdata. We just don't call it anecdotal anymore. We just, because it's part of our story. But so I don't treat it as a conflict. I treat it as there's more than what meets the eye. There are more clues in these contradictions, if there is any. And also we go with the prior. So instead of going to the field and figuring out what do you grow the most, okay, is it jawar, is it wheat, I'm going with the prior. I have selected where I'm going to do the field work. I know that this district in India produces the most jawar. So instead of a regular interview, my work then also becomes driven by the data. My interviews are driven by the data, and they are of many flavors. You can interview the government person and have accountability come in, which data will not show that side of the story. You can also have who are the people who this issue is affecting, who are impacted by it, all of that. And finally, there is a very thin difference between what data can measure, which is output. And so, for example, you can say that bank accounts in India are going up. Everybody now has a bank account, and that is an output. You've measured a number. But has it led to financial inclusion is something like how we say in policy parlance, we say it's the outcome. We really don't know how many of those accounts are inactive or have never made a transaction. I don't know, right? So what you measure is only when you go to the field, there's more that what meets the eye basically is how I think about fieldwork and anecdata.
And see, more than anecdotal data, see, it brings back, I mean, I want to go back to where we started. See, sometimes it's about you trying to understand the subject matter for which you're looking into data at. Because otherwise it becomes a problem, you get headlines that are all messed up. Like you'll have a headline saying UP is more safe for women than Bangalore. Now, if you look at the NCRB data, that will be true. But anybody who's lived in the country would know it, not to belittle any state. They would know that UP doesn't have an environment where you can walk up and file a complaint. So the number of recorded cases are bound to be low. While in Bangalore, you can go and complain, so it will be more. So there was 1 year where criminal cases against the cops had gone up by 400%, had gone up by 120%, and that was driven by a 300% increase in Kerala, because the new DG came and he said, I don't care who you guys are and who the cop is. You will come and say, if you find a cop doing corruption, you will file a complaint, I will prosecute. So because Kerala became so good, the number of criminal cases against police officers in Kerala increased by 300%, taking the national average up by 120%. So if the headline is going to be Kerala cops most corrupt in the country, now that there is a problem there, right? So a lot of times it's about more than anecdotal data, it's about what you tend to know or what is passed on, and it's common facts, right? Those kind of things. Sometimes it's common sense. You'll have to look at why and what, because otherwise, especially with crime data, it can be very dangerous.
So I think
when
Surbhi
the story
wanted
has to
add-
make an
yeah.
impact, because essentially, why are we doing these stories?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not for us, right? So we are doing the story so that people read, and then there is some change. Perhaps maybe I'm old school, but I do think that there should be something. So if you take a road accident story, why don't you localize the data? It could be a Hadapsar data, right? So you have the NCRB data, you have all those stats, you can layer your copy with all that, but you actually go down, localize it for that city, and say in Hadapsar there were like so many deaths in the last 5 years. there's a lot of legwork. You talk to people there, but if you actually get the data from the traffic cops, I think it works out to be a great story with no credible data source. But yes, the traffic cops are telling us that isme ye baras mein itna accident hua hadap se, that kind of thing.
Can I ask one thing on the Kerala example? So one thing that really helps in building a long form story is triangulating the data. So the data journalism community in India has done this work on NCRB, and what you will find in Kerala is that, so even for crimes against women, you'd be surprised that, okay, why is Kerala topping the charts for this particular thing? And it is the fact that maybe women, there is some sort of literacy and education in the state to know that this is wrong, and to have the agency to go and report it. That is one. But also then you triangulate it and see, okay, what share of the police force in Kerala is women? Because then women feel safer to go and report it to other women, right? If you're going to have to talk to a man, people are not going to do it, right? So there is hesitation. So then you triangulate and you say, okay, how does the story come together? So that work has been done.
Okay, so since we have about 5 minutes now, I'll just go to the audience. If the audience has any questions, and then we can kind of continue.
My question is for Surbhi. For a data journalism, like you said, you use tools, right? So I would love to know about the tools that you use, and are they open to? Is it free to use, or are they paid or something?
I think you can take that mic.
All the tools that I don't pay for anything. Okay, so all the tools are open source. Some of them will have a steeper learning curve, but the thing with being a data journalist is that you have to be really agile. At some point, I was really stuck with how I'm going to learn this, etc., and how I'm going to apply this. When you take a problem or take a report you like and just back work the calculations on a tool that you want to be comfortable with, you will learn it in like 5 days. Okay, so all of them are open source, and some of them have paid features, but we don't use the paid features. We're very happy with where it is right now with the open features as well. So Flourish, Data Wrapper, QGIS, all of it is free. Yeah, thank you.
There's a couple of questions there.
So Data Wrapper is quite good for the end presentation thing, but I've never used it. I've only tested it, but it's quite good.
So I have a question about what do we do when there is not enough data? You've talked about finding data and all. So I see that, there's this lot of talk about these New York Times sort of pieces where every scroll, there's a question and there's a very data-driven answer. And you're like you said, data decorated stories. And I feel like people want to see more of those. But we also should be pointing out when there is no data, and how do we do that efficiently? Because I really don't know, and I'm asking from experience. I'm struggling with how do we point that there is lack of data in these points.
So can I take this question? I will be very specific. There are I'll talk about health. There are very few cancer registries. We know the burden of cancer is increasing in the country. How do we get that data? We are always relying on WHO, Lancet, etc. But if our local level registries, which are further strengthened by the government or whatever, and we have trained people like in data and all that to actually, understand what is the burden, I think that is where we can pick up more numbers. I mean, at least so that, our stories are like really strong and resonate with the audience.
So you talked about working in a team. Are there statisticians on the team, or do you think that's actually a useful thing to have? When you're working with stories with data, and trained statisticians, either at a BSc, MSc, PhD, whatever level that you want to think about, and data, plural or singular?
Data is plural. Data would be singular. So, no, but when I speak of a team, it's not really a team with each person designed to be an expert at a certain thing. When I say a team works together, it's usually what they've been doing traditionally. The designer's been designing pages before data journalism. And also data journalism is not something very new. Yeah, people have used data from the 50s or even before that. It's not as if it's something that's come up in this century or the first quarter of this century. It's all being sold that way. Like how they suddenly said, you need to eat good amount of salt, or things like that. There are these new things that people. It's like how startup became a catchword. Every company that started somewhere was a startup, right? It's not as if companies came with 100 years of history and landed somewhere. It didn't happen. Somebody started somewhere. The Tatas started somewhere. They opened somewhere and then they grew. So like that. So when I say we work as a team, what I mean sometimes is you're doing a data story, you're writing it. Say I'm based out of Bangalore, so I do a lot of national stuff. So there are some good examples where it's worked out well, where the data lands up in Delhi, and then there's a designer who's trying to visualize the input I've given. Sometimes she consults or he consults, sometimes there's no consultation, but you seem to be on the same page, where it's come out really well. They've picked the right graphs, and then the right amount of text has been retained, what we thought comes out, and then you feel good. And sometimes it doesn't happen like that because people are working on multiple things and not everybody understands why you're trying to tell this story. Sometimes it is a day's assignment for you, right? Like, okay, you crop a picture for the box car. So somebody is doing that. And somebody else is also sent a table and then they're trying to create a graphic out of it. So sometimes it all happens interconnectedly, and then but it lands up in one place where the reader is trying to get to see it together. So that is how the teamwork, because we didn't have a team like what she was mentioning. I have never been formally part of such a team. Although Toy has a good team, the Times Insight group that sits in Delhi, they do a pretty good job. But I've always been on and off. I work with them sometimes and then I don't, and that's how I've worked. So I've not been part of that team. That team operates like that, and there's no uh, qualified statistician, so to speak, because I think some of those specializations, especially in journalism, end up causing more trouble than provide solutions. Because
So I'll just
journalism
stop
is
you
is
there,
is,
Chetan,
is,
because
is is quite
we're running
different
out
that
of
way.
time. But I think the
Yeah, but I'm just
audience-
going to add to him, please, if
I'll-
you don't mind, because since
Yeah,
he's spoken about
talk
the Times of
about
India, I have to
your,
speak about Indian Express also, no?
I think
So
this is
it's
always
just
the
that-
case, Times of India and Indian Express.
No.
But
It's just that
yeah.
I just want to add to what he says is that when you're saying statisticians, so yeah, we do have very highly qualified people also who are journalists who have, gone away from what they were doing to come back as journalists. Like I have engineers in our Pune team, but having come from a non-scientific background, I think it's more the effort that I have to put in to understand. Basically, if don't understand, how will the reader understand? So for that I have to connect and talk and talk and talk to multiple people like you all, and also get it on board so that my editor finally understands, okay, so this is the thing.
So we can
And that's how
continue
it-
this
So
conversation
just to
offline.
add to this,
Chetan,
before we
we'll
have
end
an
here.
unveiling.
We'll end here.
No,
We'll
before
end
we
here.
unveil, just to
Because
add
we're
to that,
already
I
at
think not
5:30.
having a science background serves as well.
Okay. So, no, I think all of them have a lot to add. I think there are a lot of questions as well. And I'm sorry, but I'll have to cut this right now. We're above time also. And we need to keep this going. Please go to all of them for all their expertise. I mean, Anuradha has a book she wants to show you. Chetan has a
I'm
lot
just
of...
going to take this
yeah.
opportunity to please introduce my debut book, because it's been an opportunity for me. There's a lot of data in it. So this is a biography, exclusive biography of Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. And why I've got it is because it's a scientist, the inaugural scientist at the WHO. So if you all are interested, please do read the book. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks for this
yeah,
opportunity.
Please approach them, because I know there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of information with all of them which they also want to share. So please find them and continue the conversation. Thank you.